There are weapons so iconic that they not only defined an era, but also the market of that era. And while to many the Ruger 10/22 may just look like a small sporting rifle, in reality this weapon has a very rich history. And above all, it defined a market for a category of weapons. Hello everyone, I am, as always, Vlad Sparastoria, and I know things about shooting, and today this is the weapon we're going to examine, the amazing Ruger 10/22. It has a very rich history and a mechanism that's surprising in the simplicity of its solutions. And it has been able to read the American and international markets, becoming somewhat the queen of semi-automatic .22 caliber rifles. Let's go see exactly how and why it was created to understand this weapon. To understand the Ruger 10/22, we first have to start with its creator, who gave it his name, William Ruger. That's a very important thing. A lot of people, and it really annoys me, they tend to write and pronounce this name Ruger with the German umlaut, and they say it with their mouth all puckered up, Ruger. So I know the last name is of German origin, but the guy was a real American from New York. His parents didn't speak German. His grandparents didn't speak German either. They had come to America generations and generations ago. He was American first. Damn, really, just like the New York Yankees. So Ruger, also because that's how he always called himself without the two dots. There's a lot of confusion about this up here. Let's clear this up once and for all. William Ruger was born in 1916 in New York, and right from the start he was deeply passionate about firearms. He had a great passion, and you can see it a bit in his products. The products that would bring him success and that he would love very much. Firearms. And just think, for example, he went to university in North Carolina, and instead of having fun with his peers, he was more interested in staying in a basement modifying firearms. In particular, he did a very interesting first job where he took one of the first weapons that would have a huge influence on this design, that is a Savage 99 carbine. This Savage 99 was a lever-action carbine that had a very particular magazine, which instead of being, for example, a tubular one as we normally think of them, was a rotary magazine. The invention of the rotary magazine should actually be attributed to a certain Otto Schonauer. Have you perhaps heard of him? This last name combined with Mannlicher, like the Mannlicher Schonauer rifles. This rotary magazine system was the one adopted by Steyr after they were essentially starting to give up on the Mannlicher type clips. We're all familiar with the Mannlicher clip, which is used in the Carcano. Well, for many people, militarily speaking, at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, it wasn't entirely liked. Maybe they liked the rifles. Mannlicher, the Mannlicher action, but not the loading system. For many nations, Greece comes to mind first. At that time, it offered as an alternative the Schonauer loading system, a rotating magazine, which essentially has what we could briefly describe as a revolver cylinder that presents the cartridges one by one. It seems like a big complication, but it has its advantages. It has significant advantages, especially when it comes to properly feeding cartridges that have a protruding rim. We've seen how weapons with a protruding rim struggle when fed from box magazines. Think of the very famous one. The oldest fans of the channel will remember the interrupter inside the magazine of the Mosin Nagant. Useless complication. By complicating things elsewhere, Schonauer actually solved the problem. Yes, you had a rotating element that might seem excessively complicated, but you also had excellent feeding when this system worked. What Bill Ruger does with that Savage 99, which featured this magazine, is make it semi-automatic. He makes it semi-automatic. By the way, this conversion of his, this model that he converted to semi-automatic, is still preserved at the National Rifle Association Museum, so it can be viewed. It's very interesting. There are also videos circulating where this firearm is presented. He sent this project to Savage, who was not interested at all. Bill Ruger would have the door slammed in his face. Many times before he managed to achieve success, he kept being interested in firearms. He eventually inherited $10,000, a significant sum back then. He gets married, travels a lot, spends a bit of the money, and when he returns to the United States, he ends up working first for Springfield Armory, but even there, he won't have much success. He would later say that According to him, he faced a lot of opposition and a lot of conservatism from the military authorities during World War II. Instead, he would work for Auto Ordnance, the company that made the Thompson, and for them he would design a machine gun that would be tested, but it too would not be adopted. Now, from this point of view, we only hear Bill Ruger's side, who was bitter about it, saying that his was a brilliant invention and the others didn't understand anything. The fact is, he ended up almost poor because he ended up working in a workshop for $20 a week, which today seems like very little, and even back then it wasn't a lot of money. While trying to start other businesses, he tried creating a company that made tools and drills in particular, even of good quality, but it wasn't successful. Sadly, he fails in business. However, luck will come to him at the age of 32, which is special for me because I am 32 years old right now. Because at 32, he got to know his neighbor better, an eccentric, wealthy painter, artist, and firearms collector. A certain Alexander Sturm, also a descendant of German immigrants, they team up because Ruger has the idea to produce a semi-automatic pistol for the American sports market. Sturm likes this idea, also because the pistol they are going to produce strongly resembles some classic designs, like the Luger or the Japanese Nambu pistol. Let's remember that this is shortly after World War II. This very famous pistol will later become the Ruger Sturm, a weapon that, by the way, some time ago, a few years back, we saw on the channel. If you want to watch that video, you can click right here. Here, something clickable should pop up right now. It was a hugely successful weapon, not only because of its very classic design, but also because it had a very competitive price. Just think, the other pistol that filled the same market segment, the Colt Woodsman, cost $60 at the time. Bill Ruger sold his Ruger Standard for $37, so just a little more than half the price of the direct competition. How was he able to have such a low price? Two fundamental principles, generally speaking: constructive simplicity and innovative use as much as possible of materials. Bill Ruger invests a lot in new production techniques. Obviously, World War II was a time when many things were experimented with. Let's think about the extensive use of sheet metal in the military field and the introduction of new materials like aluminum. Bill Ruger in particular perfected a casting technique for steel and aluminum for the firearms industry. And the so-called lost wax investment casting, literally a wax mold was made in which you could achieve very fine details, very perfect details. Also, with the right metallurgy, he knew how to melt steel and aluminum in an excellent way, so much so that they were really good at making these castings of steel and aluminum, which Bill Ruger will start. First one, then two subsidiaries. That's what they did. They also produced parts for him, but they also produced for the general market, for anyone who needed parts made with this technique. He was so successful, and it's worth saying he made a lot of money. The money for his later investments really came from this company. He was good at selling weapons. At that time, he had found his path, but a lot of the real cash came from his great engineering ability to produce these parts. Bill Ruger often said you must understand your market, crediting his success to being an enthusiast himself. You see, during World War II, the American Army introduced a fairly innovative weapon that other nations in that role did not have. We're discussing the famous M1 Carbine, which I plan to feature in a video soon. Also because I know who has it, and we just need to agree on a time so we can finally film it. It was a very innovative weapon. It was a weapon that was issued to those who would normally have had a pistol, so they could have a weapon for, we could say, self-defense. In a way, a personal defense weapon, a little carbine that weighed less than 3 kilos, but had ammunition powerful enough to shoot at 5,100 meters. In case operators of other weapon systems, radio operators, logistics personnel, or medics needed to defend themselves, the M1 Carbine would be the most produced and used weapon by the United States Army. And so, many veterans of this war knew it very well. It was a light and extremely compact weapon. And do you know what they tried to do? The millions of American veterans who returned to the United States, they tried to go hunting with it. However, they realized that the .30 carbine round, while perfect for personal defense, didn't perform well beyond a certain distance. It may have worked well with larger animals like wild boars or deer. Then Bill Ruger got involved, while Alexander Sturm had already passed away. In fact, he had complete control of the company, and now he also had the money. And he proposed a carbine that's closely related to this one here, which we'll see now, the Ruger 44 for the caliber it used, the 44 Magnum. Already a much more powerful ammunition, which could, with the right loads, handle bigger animals compared to the .30 carbine. Here too, for his weapon, he will use these parts made by casting, but for example, he will still have problems with the magazine because, for instance, he will use a tubular magazine. Bill Ruger stated that for these weapons to be successful, they must have, as much as possible, a traditional look. He didn't want magazines sticking out. They didn't want a hunting weapon to have the appearance of a classic hunting weapon. And the only way to hold a certain amount of ammunition was to use a tubular magazine, which also vaguely resembled certain weapons from the Old West. And along with this, Ruger 44, shortly after, he thought about developing a .22 caliber rifle in parallel, because there were many people who had bought the Ruger 44, but the ammunition was expensive. There was a lot of recoil, and there was room in the market for a weapon like that. There weren't many .22 caliber semi-automatic rifles around. Above all, there weren't any rifles that resembled an extremely popular weapon, namely the M1 carbine. And above all, there weren't any weapons that could hold a lot of ammunition in a very compact package. And here we have Bill Ruger already complaining in '64, for example, a famous journalist from a popular hunting magazine in America. The only thing that, damn it, Otto Schönauer didn't do was get his rotary magazine adopted by the American Army, because that rotary magazine is just too good, and that rotary magazine obsessed him. He got to work on this idea. Also because the .22 is a rimmed cartridge. If you're familiar with certain magazines, the .22 magazines are these banana-shaped things that are really ugly to look at. He put two of his top engineers on solving this problem, and they solved the first big issue, the heart of the action. It's a rotary magazine that may seem strange to us, but it conveniently holds 10 rounds. In such a compact package, in terms of height, I managed to fit 10 rounds, where a straight magazine, probably single stack, would have been much longer and more protruding, thus allowing not so much an elegant mechanical solution, but allowing for an elegant aesthetic, allowing the weapon. Now let's move on to the cut. This is now made of polymer, but was once made of wood and is still available in wood for those wanting a classic look. And, I repeat, Bill Ruger understood the market. He always said that if you don't understand the market, if you do market surveys and ask people what they want, you're in the wrong market. You have to know what people want in your heart by your own instinct, and he by instinct understood that people wanted a classic look. And this magazine, more than a mechanical requirement, really responded to the need for this look, to hide the magazine inside the firearm, while still maintaining a good capacity. The Ruger 10-22, where 10 is the number of rounds in the magazine, and 22 is the caliber, was thus placed alongside the Ruger 44. The two were often sold together. There were actually ads that said, look, with this one that looks like an M1 carbine, you can go hunting, and with this one, which has the exact same ergonomics, you can too. You can practice, you can train, you can take your son shooting, why not, as it's normal to do in the United States. And this weapon even surpassed the success of the Ruger 44. It immediately became extremely popular. The rotary magazine wasn't the only innovation. It has two other very interesting features, which we'll clearly see a bit better once we take it apart. First of all, it has a barrel that I wouldn't say is quick change, really easy to remove, but it has a very unique attachment system that also allows for relatively easy removal with just a few tools. This was done not so much to make it modular, but because of how it was built, since the receivers of this weapon were made of aluminum. While the barrel has to be made of steel, there's a production issue. When these parts are joined, the receiver and the barrel must be firmly attached to the receiver. Often they are joined before being finished. That is, here we have a bluing that must be applied anyway to preserve the steel. This bluing is usually applied after the two elements are combined together, for the simple reason that to carry out this process industrially, the parts often need to be held quite firmly by equipment. I can't just unscrew the barrel myself, they use special machines. If I finished it first, those machines would ruin the finish, so I assemble the parts first, then finish them. The issue is, with an aluminum receiver and steel barrel, I can't use the same finishing process. In other words, I can't join them first and finish them later. I have to finish them first and then join them. And that's how this particular patent was invented. Will we see this atrioventricular block later? To try to attach the barrel to the receiver, which resulted in any company being able to produce barrels for the Ruger 1022. It was one of the very first firearms on the market. This shouldn't be underestimated. It really was one of the very first firearms on the market that had an easily removable barrel. Not quickly, but definitely easily. Another thing he did was to integrate here, inside the receiver, a system to slow down the bolt. In fact, the rate of fire without this slowing system would be particularly high, and this was done to increase reliability. The problem is often the magazines, which can't present the ammunition quickly enough to a bolt that's moving fast. Because the 22s in terms of firing cycle are very fast. The Ruger 1022 is still one of the slowest on the market today, precisely because it has a system that slows it down. But since it has a system that slows it down, it can also have a fairly strong spring, which only benefits reliability. And this, above all, was the great reputation of the 1022. The 1022s were not just aesthetically pleasing firearms. They were not just firearms for which it's easy to find components. They were and still are extremely reliable rifles. This is probably one of the most reliable .22s still on the market today. This one has been praised, loved, and acclaimed over the decades by so many different people. Does it have such a rich market right now? What do you think about the October 22nd? Is it possible to build one without using a single Ruger component? You can find everything, but obviously it's more difficult. In Italy, maybe finding barrels or bolts, but you can find barrels or bolts of any kind. You can find everything aftermarket. They made higher capacity magazines, like 25 round banana-shaped ones that stick out, but everyone did this. You can really call it the Glock of .22 caliber carbines. The more you examine this weapon, the clearer its well-deserved success becomes. It's one of those things that you look at and say, damn, it's really made intelligently. Let's move the camera so we can take a look at how it's made inside. Also, I think you want to see some of these patents we've been talking about. Since we're at the shooting range, we'll try it out. As usual, let's begin our tour of the markings. First of all, as you can see, the stickers with which the weapon was sold are still on it. These stocks like this in the gun shop, obviously they're from Ruger. The owner just left them on. He likes it that way. He likes to show off that he really has a very beautiful weapon. The markings, as you see, besides the serial number, show the caliber. 1022, meaning a .22 caliber magazine holds 10 rounds. 22 long rifle. Obviously, for a period, they were also produced in .22 Winchester Magnum, but they're no longer made because it's not nearly as popular. Ruger, Newport, New Hampshire, United States of America. On the right side, instead, on the bolt, as you can see, the company's logo is repeated. Since you'll definitely ask me, as you can see, I'll repeat it. During the live fire test, we use a red dot from Vector Optics with a magnifier that can be quickly removed for access. Personally, I prefer it without the magnifier. But for the simple reason, I'll say it during the live fire test, that the stock is a bit short for me and this magnifier is a bit too close to my eye. It's not at the correct focal distance for my particular ergonomics. We also notice that these sights are mounted on a rail. Speaking of sights, if you don't mount optical sights on a rail, by the way, these rails, some weapons have them, some don't. There are really a lot of different Ruger 1022 configurations. Normally you have a very simple front sight and then here, further ahead, a rear sight notch, which can also be used with this little dot. I know how much you can see right now. for a slightly quicker acquisition aside from the fairly modern sight of the weapon, and for some very modern technological institutions, which we have already mentioned a little, and now we'll take a closer look at them. Actually, the configuration is quite traditional when you think about it. This stock, which is made of very light polymer, could also easily be made of wood. Even the look and texture are very traditional, and it can still be disassembled as a weapon in a fairly traditional way. I almost forgot two other controls that we have. We have the the magazine release, which is this fairly large one here. This, by the way, is another part added by the owner, because the original release is quite small. With this, however, you can easily reach the 10-round magazine, the 10-round rotary magazine. Then we have this little bar here, which is nothing more than a manual hold open. It's something that's a bit critical in this firearm because I really like hold opens, especially on .22s. I'll say it because it prevents you even more from dry firing. On the last shot, the firing pin gets damaged a bit less. In theory, we then have, very classically, a button safety. In this position, the weapon can't fire, but if pushed, let's say toward the camera right now from the left side, you can see that it then makes a small red ring. We're ready to fire, and of course we all know what it's for. We have the weapon's trigger. Apart from this, going back, I repeat, there are many different variants and variations of these weapons. It's classic in its look, appearance, and configuration, and now we'll disassemble it. The disassembly of this weapon is quite traditional despite its innovative construction. It's loved partly because of this traditional aspect. Think about it, we have to start the disassembly by removing the band on the barrel, the band that is actually made of plastic. We can unscrew the small Allen screw. Let's see if, there we go, you don't even have to take it all the way out. Just remove the band like this. By the way, strictly speaking, it doesn't even seem like the barrel goes anywhere without the band, so it might not even be necessary. In quotes, we also have another screw that holds the stock together with the action. Let's unscrew it and we should be able to separate them. Sorry, I need to change the Allen key. Can you see here? Modern firearms, maybe sometimes you need fewer tools, but then I think about good old Palace where you needed quite a few different ones, and I can't complain. Let's unscrew, let's take out this screw. The action screw isn't very long, but it's kind of long in quotes because it has to hold the action and keep it in place. Let's set this screw from the stock aside now. The main trick, carefully remove the stock at this stage. But the safety blocks our way. For example, if we have wooden guns, be careful because you can damage the gun during this step. The trick is that the safety should be put more or less in an intermediate position. It doesn't really click into place. You can more or less put it in a sort of middle position, and that way everything will be able to come out. Here we go. This way it goes through, as you can see. Let's take a quick look at the stock. As you can see here, it's literally a single piece of polymer. You can just see the joint where the two halves that were made from plastic have been attached together. There are many stocks here, including wood and polymer kits, and even bullpup conversion kits, which is heresy. But really, the Ruger 1022 is one of the most customizable guns on the market. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Is it really the Glock, the Armalite rifle, 15, or the Kalashnikov of .22 caliber rifles? Let's take a closer look at the actual action of the weapon. As you can see, by the way, it's kind of funny if you think about it, the weapon can fire everything in this condition. All the weapon's mechanical parts are in this package. For example, there are also conversions, let's say versions of the October 22nd that look like little submachine guns. Essentially because all the action of the weapon is here. This weapon in this condition right now can actually fire, and in this sense it also fits very well. But let's start to look at one of the first very interesting features, which is this block. Here you can see this block with this V and two screws. This is what holds the barrel to the barrel. In this way, you can tighten the barrel, which is made of steel, and it can be fastened to the receiver, which is made of aluminum. This is not steel, this is very lightweight aluminum. And as we said, a way was needed to connect the two because they couldn't be finished together. And so actually with this system being able to connect steel to aluminum quite easily, this problem was solved, which I repeat was mainly a production problem. It was a problem to reduce costs. Aluminum receiver. That this then resulted in the fact that the barrel of the 1022 is relatively easy to remove is another matter. It's a bonus, it's an advantage, but the real advantage was purely from the point of view, let's say industrial. We also noticed something quite peculiar. The charger to enter the back has this tip, and there's a corresponding recess that, as you can see, moves in this way. A rather peculiar magazine release if you think about it, but this feature also allows for magazines of typical shapes and sizes because the magazine, strictly speaking, now in that type of stock we saw, it has to go in straight, but as you can see, what happens if we remove the action from the stock? In theory, these magazines can be mounted and inserted at an angle, so to speak. They can almost be inserted from the side, so to speak. Not 100%, not exactly, but there is some leeway to work with. You can make this magazine wider, narrower, and so on. Anyway, it attaches in the center, which means versatility. You can make magazines of different shapes and sizes. There's no requirement to use this initial rotary one. I'm not sure if I'm clear. Since it attaches in the center, there's plenty of space for attachment. I could make a thicker magazine. I could make a slimmer magazine. In short, there's great versatility with this design. To continue disassembling, we actually need to remove the trigger mechanism, which is held in place by these two pins. Let's try to remove them. Here's one coming out. And now let's remove the other pin as well. Let's see if it wants to come out. Sorry, but I can't. Here it is. Sorry about the cut, but I was struggling to pull it out. Here's the other one, the other pin, identical to the first. In this way, actually, we can remove the trigger mechanism, which is also a completely self-contained unit. This way, we can also see the components like the manual hold open. Here you can see the manual hold open lifts up and holds the bolt, and of course, the hammer of the weapon. A very standard single action trigger with the safety that physically blocks the trigger. As you can see, this part of the receiver is plastic. Nowadays they're made in plastic, but this was originally made of aluminum, always produced with this well-known microcasting technique, because it's a piece that's not extremely complicated but relatively complex. For example, making it milled from steel would have been much more difficult, while with the right casting techniques, which Bill Ruger excelled at, it becomes much simpler. From this point of view, we can also see a bit better right now the action, the way the weapon is recocked. As you can see, I can pull back the bolt stops. You see there's this pin and the bolt stops on this pin. But it also does something very interesting because the back of the bolt actually has a small inclined plane when the bolt moves against this pin. Actually, in the last part of its travel, it literally has to move up a little bit vertically. This causes quite a bit of resistance in the movement, in moving, decelerating in this way and starting again, this deceleration with the addition of this vertical movement, we could say, and having to decelerate and accelerate again. Sorry, by closing while making this vertical movement, it's the reason that slows down the firing cycle of the weapon. One of the reasons why this weapon is very reliable is that the rate of fire is slowed down. This essentially achieves two things. First, if the cyclic rate were very high, I would need a magazine that's just as fast. One of the limitations actually to the rate of fire of weapons or the problems caused by magazines is that often the magazine doesn't have time to feed, to raise the next round, which is slower than the bolt itself. In conclusion, to avoid making a magazine too complicated or with an excessively strong spring, one of the solutions is to slow down the bolt. However, by slowing down the bolt, I can put a strong spring behind it, which will allow me to close the weapon in many different conditions. If I use a weak round, the bolt opens, gets slowed down a little, and then closes. It works with the weak round, but with a strong round, the final deceleration is greater. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this clearly, and the spring stays more compressed and snaps back into position with more force. Now, I used a lot of words to tell you this, but in quotes, it's a bit like that. A somewhat self-regulating system, in the sense that the force of this closure, the operation self-regulates a bit with this delay system. And it works very well with less powerful ammunition, and it also handles those that are a bit more powerful, which would otherwise cycle too much, quite well. The bolt then sorry if you can't see very well, but I'm trying to remove this plastic pin. Let's see how it slides off from there. Here it is, here it is. I'm being told that this isn't the original pin, it's a piece of polyethylene used because the original pin was lost one day when the owner was trying to disassemble this weapon. Let's set it aside, and even if we lose it, I could already see it was coming off easily from this perspective. We only have the bolt left. Actually, right now it's a bit tricky to remove. We have to hold back the charging handle and the bolt. At this point, if we put our finger inside, it lifts up. And it will want to come out. Here it is. We did it, but need to work on it more. So we have the bolt of the weapon, the charging handle that fits into this position. It physically controls the bolt with the recoil spring. These are two separate units. Now we're not going to remove the barrel because first it's a tough job unscrewing these screws. I don't want to ruin the possible headspace that's already set on this weapon. I thought of this not so much as a quick barrel change, but definitely as an easier one. Anyway, it's a job you can do at home, but it's a bit of a gunsmith's job, so I strongly advise against doing it unless it's absolutely necessary. What do you think? This way, you can access the space here in the firearm to complete the cleaning. Reassembling it is actually a bit of a hassle. Mainly the hassle is with the firearms bolt, because we have to manage to put the handle in without it popping out of its position. There you go. And only this way can we put the firearms bolt back in straight. Let's see if we can do it. Oh, does it feel less tricky than I was afraid of? Can you do this movement easily? Let's put the pin back in. This one, the handmade pin that holds the shutter in place at the end of its travel. There you go. Sorry if you didn't see everything, but really, if you've never filmed the disassembly of firearms, it's hard to explain how difficult it is to do it in front of a camera. Sometimes you have to hold things. I'm pretty far away with my hands fully extended. It's hard to do things when your hands are stretched out like this. But getting back to us, since we're almost done, we can put the trigger group back in. On its two pins that hold it in place. We put in the front one first, sorry, the back one. I get confused with the simplest terms sometimes. There we go, it's in. Let's also put in the front one. This one goes in pretty easily too. From this point of view, the back one is a bit tighter than the front one. We're missing it. Right now, let's just make sure again that the lock is in the middle position. Otherwise, the action won't go through. There, it's a bit hard to hold it, but that's how you do it. The action of the weapon passes onto the stock. Here we are. Very good, perfect. Now we can put back the screw that holds the action. All right, Miss Vit, please go in gently. Let's go in. But I'm using it, maybe I'm not using the right one? This is definitely the right Allen key. Rugger signori miei, couldn't you have done something? Couldn't you have used just one tool to hold everything together? Let's tighten it really well. All that's left is to put the clamp back on. The clamp, which we can tighten with the other tip we have available. Here we are. And here, the weapon is as good as new. By the way, when operating the bolt, this simple method delays it a bit more than usual because I open. But you get to a certain point at the end of the stroke where I really feel another position as if there were almost another spring to overcome, which we know isn't there. But it's simply the shape of the pin that interacts with the shutter itself, which can move a bit vertically. Also because we moved it to take it apart. What can I say? Let's try it. So let's fire a few shots with this Ruger 10-22. We've already seen how the magazines work. We just have a 10-round one, the classic rotary magazine from Ruger. We insert it and operate the bolt in its simplicity. Obviously, it doesn't have a hold open, so please don't rely on something that isn't there. Let's aim. We have a steel target at about 50 meters. We can remove the magazine. Now, this release lever that the owner installed, I'll say it again because these are highly customizable firearms, doesn't exactly make me jump for joy. Let's do it without the magnifier, which is also the focal distance. I have to say that right now we're not at a great distance because at 50 meters, any decent shooter can hit a target, a piece of steel. But I have to say that so far, in terms of accuracy, it's not disappointing us at all. And especially in terms of reliability, it's not disappointing us either. In fact, let me remind you that one of the greatest qualities for which this weapon was initially praised was its reliability. So, first impressions. First of all, it's very light. Not that you expect much weight from a 22, but I want to emphasize this. It's a very light weapon, following the famous lines of the M1 Carbine. If I have to make a criticism, for me it's the length of the stock when you go to hold it. But remember one thing when you meet me, for example, at fairs or around shooting ranges, many people are surprised by this. But I'm a bit taller and bigger than I might seem on camera, simply because I'm not lanky. But I'm 1.91 meters tall, and honestly, my arms are long. The legroom is a bit short for me, but nothing, let's say, unmanageable from this point of view. The trigger is decent, but it's certainly not a match trigger, meaning it's not a competition or precision trigger. So if you're thinking of winning bench rest competitions in .22, there are firearms more suitable for that purpose, but for what it was made for, which is plinking, purely recreational shooting, we could call it. And of course, where it's allowed, hunting small animals, where you can go hunting for rabbits and squirrels. Very light, very comfortable, quick to aim and move. Let's reload and have some more fun. These weapons seem almost like toys when you see them. But anyone who goes shooting for sport, not to mention those who actually have to use firearms, they really appreciate when a weapon is light and easy to carry. Also because, for example, we come to the shooting range by car, right, transporting the weapon. Many people, including military personnel and hunters, fall into this category. This damn weapon, they often have to carry it long distances. And then shooting is relatively little from this point of view. And when shooting with this weapon, you also appreciate the ergonomics of the M1 carbine. By the way, small spoiler, it will come. I promise you that the M1 carbine will also arrive, which, as we said, inspired the Ruger 1022. It's a convenient weapon if you have many tasks or items to carry. A compact carbine like this is perfect for its intended use. No, Bill Ruger was smart to realize this. This slice of the market. Let's fire a few more shots. Notice that I'm not even putting on the headphones because it's really quiet. With this ammo and the long barrel, sometimes the rifle, the .22-1 is like this under this nice drizzle. Let's insert the magazine into the weapon, approach our BTAC, maybe put on the magnifier. Let's see. Ah, really. The only thing it's missing maybe is a hold open, mainly not for a quick reload. You know, I think a lot of firearm features are often a bit misunderstood. There are things that are useful, but they're also useful for other reasons. Let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Now, what would a hold open be useful for in a weapon like this? You might think the reload is fast because of the hold open, but that's just video game influence making you focus on quick reloads. When I think about the hold open, especially in 22s, I think of two things. First, obviously, inspecting the chamber. Because when the bolt stays open, I have a very quick way to inspect the chamber, and I can leave the weapon in a condition that I know is not ready to fire. Second, if I fire many shots without counting, the firing pin hits the barrel on the last one. That's the usual 22 issue. You shouldn't dry fire them. And a hold open helps a little with this, but it's one more complication. This one, just to be clear before you start commenting, has a manual hold open. Many guns have manual hold opens. Recently, I got a comment about the Fabrique Nationale 1900. I said it doesn't have a hold open, just a manual one. Yeah, it's not that useful. Basically, it's just so you don't get a click on the last shot. But clearly I have a small lever, as we've seen on this side, that I can press inside and leave the bolt in an open position. Useful, basically, maybe just for inspection, but not to preserve the firing pin as much as possible. But do you know when the firing pin doesn't get damaged? When we shoot? So let's load it again and fire a few more shots. Here we are with good old Matteo, as always obsessed with left-handedness, who will also give us his opinion on how to handle this weapon with reversed hands as the devil wants.
You handle it with your hands. And I know this weapon very well. I don't understand what's so hard about doing this maneuver. Anyway, that's how it is.
So it doesn't make me ecstatic. Honestly, this magazine release is aftermarket, not original, and you can tell it doesn't do much.
Aftermarket, it's 3D printed.
You shouldn't say these things, but whatever.
But it's definitely related.
Yeah, okay, jokes aside, before D-Ghost arrives, Miss Totally Related, you can do a mag release. Absolutely. So now, serious opinions.
I love it then. This weapon was bought on my recommendation for someone who wanted to buy a gun to start shooting a rifle. I told him you need a weapon that costs the right amount, is reliable, has a great quality price ratio, and has excellent support and availability of parts. And you use an affordable caliber. 22 Ruger 10, 22. This new weapon can be found for under 450 euros.
Absolutely, yes.
The Ruger warranty, which is one of the best on the market.
They're among the best, though they do cost more, but it truly matters. There are companies that have good and bad customer service. They are also quite famous for their customer service. They are well known.
We're here for you and we'll fix it no matter what. Yes, it's very light.
I think it's a bit over 2 kilos.
I don't even know if it weighs 2 kilos. This rifle is made for anyone, even kids who want to plink. But in Italy, you can't. That was the idea if you want to go squirrel hunting.
Absolutely.
When you need something that shoots small, shoots fast, and doesn't have a lot of recoil, we could say yes.
I've always loved it. I don't know why, only now have I managed to get one. But it's a weapon I've always really appreciated. But it's really worth it, I mean it. Sometimes it's hard to find something truly superlative to say, but it really is. It's a weapon that set a standard,
showing just how modular it is. The Picatinny rail here is also 3D printed.
Absolutely. Only the mounts. Yes, the mounts, because everything can be changed.
You can make it a balpa or bullpup. Get creative, you can do anything with it. I love it, and the trigger is good too. For a .22 semi-auto plinking gun, it's extremely fun. I think it's the ideal weapon for a beginner.
Is there a special little discount for you? By the way, it's performing really well. It's a little bit, it's not perfectly tuned. That's the owner's fault. It's not perfectly tuned, meaning it's a little high, it's well centered, but it's a little high. We tried it on paper before, but apart from that, the weapon is extremely precise. Do you hear how it sounds? I like to make the irons sound. Remember, when you use the irons, you have to carefully check the corners where the irons bounce. It's fun to play with them and even more fun to make mistakes together. So what can I say? The Ruger 1022 is a great rifle, but I already own a 22 that's not a Ruger. But if I had to have a semi-automatic in this caliber, it would absolutely be this one. This is truly a timeless classic, and there's a real reason why it has been so successful. These are relatively easy to find guns, relatively inexpensive, and they have an incredible aftermarket. As I mentioned, in theory, you can build a 1022 without any Ruger parts. This is just theoretical, since in Italy you need serialized barrels and more, but mechanically you can find everything on the market. Because every company saw it, took it, copied it, adapted it, and made accessories. Why her? Because it's truly a well-designed firearm. There are these products that are so simple that they really show the genius behind the person and how they were designed. Good. If it's been produced for so long, from the 60s until today, there's a reason for that. Thank you all for watching this video. As always, we first want to thank those who make these videos possible, like the owner of this weapon who lent it to us today so we could try it out. If you have interesting weapons you'd like me to try, you can come here to the Sir shooting range in Spessa or to the Tiro Segno in Legnano. As for handguns, write to me. I'm always grateful to anyone who can contribute to the channel, and thanks also to everyone who supports the channel directly on Patreon and through YouTube memberships. Without you, doing these things would be very difficult, and I'll give you a heads up. Soon I'll be holding an event that I'll announce. I've hinted at this before, but I'll soon announce an important event. Priority access to limited spots will go to my direct supporters. If instead you want to contribute for free and do me a big favor, actually consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing to the channel, doing these things on YouTube. Talking about firearms isn't easy. There's a lot of opposition, in fact, from the platform and from the broader public who don't particularly like firearms. So if we can convince them that we're not doing anything wrong, let's do it. It really helps me out a lot. That's all for today, and as always, I'll see you next time.